Okay, I think we're live.
This is 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to all our comrades around the world to the Socialist Sunday.
Okay, great. Well, let me go back on here. Hey everyone! Today we have Damon and we have. Sorry, one sec. Sorry guys, I'm really bad at this. We have Damon Garcia with us, and we have Captain Haywire, my friend James, whose channels are both really great. So we're going to be talking spirituality in politics, radicalizing Christmas, and lots of things like that. So, Damon, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit first of all? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Uh, no, I should. Oh, okay. Sorry. Um, why why can't they hear? I don't know why. Oh no, I just changed it to the theme. Does that mean that they can now hear us? This is why I let Javi and Paul take over normally. Okay. um. Okay. Still. Uh. Okay. I'll share my screen with you. Shall I end this stream and then start again? Or okay. Start sharing. Okay, you can see my screen. No. Yep. Mhm. Yeah. Oh, stream. Um, general. Do I need to somehow say that it's like free coming through the microphone or anything like that? Um. Oh, okay. Does he? Okay. Normally, I've used Skype all the other times and it seems to have been fine. Um, Cookies. Maybe something with the output somewhere here. No. hmm hmm Oh, okay. So should I put headphones? Um, this one? Yeah. Mm, okay. Okay, if you guys speak. Oh yeah, look, it's working now.
Yes. Yes.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
We got bars. So you can hear us now, right?
Can someone in the chat say, can you hear? If you can hear them now.
And Paul, this is my sick jumper. It's a jumper of being sick indoors and having like the high neck and sweating a little bit so I can get out of this cold as soon as possible.
No, I don't think they can.
No one's saying anything. Oh yeah, they can. Okay.
Okay,
There were
Okay.
bars of that potential leaders. Let's do it over. Welcome
Okay.
everyone to the Socialist Sunday Stream. Where were we?
Okay. Oh, now I've got to end this. Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, shit. Stop sharing. Okay.
It's fine. What's streaming without technical difficulties, right?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. So, hey everyone. So, I'm joined today with Damon Garcia, who has an incredible YouTube channel that I think everyone should go and check out, all about spirituality and politics and reconciling the two. Because, yeah, it's spirituality and politics has generally been seen as two opposite things that should never be mixed at the moment. So, yeah, and James and I were great friends in Australia when I lived in Australia, and we used to have so many talks about spirituality and politics and so many subjects for so long. And he also edited my last video on body positivity, and probably will do the same for a few more videos. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's the plan.
And he also has an amazing website, has a poetry book, and lots of other things. I'll link it all below, and a YouTube channel. So yeah, it's great to have you guys on. So Damon, do you want to first of all explain who you are, what you do, how you came from religion to leftism, or religion and leftism?
Yeah. I grew up in the evangelical church, and then I just took a lot of it for granted. And then as I got older, I started to realize that I had a passion for teaching. I always had some sort of passion for communicating. And before it was ministry stuff, it was music and poetry and film. And so I was super into that in high school. And then I felt like I was called to be in ministry, which felt weird because that didn't make any sense. And then I realized, okay, if I'm going to do that, I have to explore what is actually like all this stuff. What am I actually talking about? And through exploring history and religion and theology and philosophy and everything around it, my beliefs started changing until eventually I guess I was a general progressive Christian, which is like socially progressive, theologically progressive. And then through liberation theology, I ended up adopting leftism, particularly Marxism, and realizing that actually you could see that thread even within the entire history of religion and the biblical narrative. And so now at this point, I'm like trying to just point people to the leftist message that was always a part of this whole thing. And really, when people think of religion, particularly Christianity, and think of all the right-wing versions of it, point people to how that is very new. That's like, I mean, in the United States, to look at Christianity as the moral majority, the religious right, the right-wing evangelicals, that started in like the 80s. And before that, evangelicals were known for being apolitical. You wouldn't be able to assume that they were Republican or whatever. And so, yeah,
Really? I
just
didn't know
pointing
that.
people to that. Yeah, it was this guy named Paul Weyrich, this Republican activist, saw the growing evangelical movement and wanted to try to find a way to mobilize them. And so he started picking out certain topics to get them active and going through a list of topics. And he realized the first one that stuck was segregation in schools, because segregation had become illegal, but some of the private Christian universities were still allowed to segregate. And so he told them, vote for Republicans and we'll let you still segregate. And that didn't last long, but that was the beginning of the religious right. And then a few years after that, they said, okay, let's think of some more. That didn't work. Okay, how about abortion? Literally a meeting of minds saying, how about abortion? 5 years after Roe v. Wade had become legalized. And so, and before that, when it did become legalized, they didn't really care. And so it was like 5 years later, they're like, how about that? And then they got big evangelical megachurch preachers to get on board. And then they got Ronald Reagan as their personal puppet and established the Christian right.
Holy shit.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
That's the story as I understand it.
But the problem with that is the Christians who try to act like that's how Christians always were, how they always thought, how they always talked. And it's usually an evangelicalism, because it's a Protestant denomination, and Protestants are like over 40,000 denominations. And the newer the denomination, the easier it is to deceive people that this is how Christians have always thought and felt and talked. And so it was kind of easy, if your denomination is only like 90 years old, to say, this is how Christians always taught, exactly like us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And can I ask as well, because I'm still learning a lot about spirituality and politics, and I'm not entirely sure exactly what I think or believe. But my general idea is sort of that I kind of feel like all religions are kind of saying the same thing, and I don't really personally believe that one is like truer than another one, although I'm obviously totally fine with anyone believing whatever religion they want to believe. But for you, so why Christianity in particular? And do you think that there's like a fundamental difference between different religions? Or do you sort of feel like they're different metaphors for the same thing, as James likes to say?
I think, well, the reason I'm a Christian, I grew up in it, and so it's like I can't exactly get it completely out of my system. Even no matter how far I run away from it, it will still pop up in different ways and deep within me. But also, as I've studied this out, I've realized that there's a value in going deep into a tradition. Like as the Buddha said, it is better to build one well 6 foot deep than 6 wells 1 foot deep. And that idea is, pick a tradition and go all the way in. Or like the Dalai Lama at times will get people who come to him and say, I'm a Christian, but I love everything you say so much, I want to become a Buddhist. And he says, no, don't. Go home and become a better Christian instead. And so I feel that way, where I've come to see and affirm all other religions, of course, but I still remain a Christian, because that's just the way that I seek depth in this spiritual exploration. But at the same time, I totally welcome and love hearing other religions in the way that they seek depth and their own tradition from their own culture as well. And so I think there is a line to where we say they're all the same. It could sound like almost as bad as people who say, I'm colorblind, all races are the same, because there is particular cultural differences that we should celebrate. Diversity should be celebrated in religions. And sometimes people can go too far and say, well, they're all saying the same thing, and kind of mask the beautiful differences. And I think, we need all of it, that we need all the different religions in the picture to give their diverse perspectives, instead of just one big blob of religion saying they're all saying the same thing. And so I value a lot of other religious perspectives. and I feel like their God is there too, definitely speaking through there too, especially like the monotheist religions. Good, honest, responsible monotheism should say there's one God, and that one God is being manifest and experienced through a variety of ways, instead of saying we got this God and they don't. Like, it's a ridiculous monotheism.
Yeah, that's
Don't you think?
yeah.
Don't you think that there's like this thing? Okay, I just had this idea. You know, when you kind of follow one religion because you learn it kind of when you're a kid. You're like immersed in it, and you know. Do you think that it could be connected to that thing when you listen to this band when you're 14 years old? You know, when you're a teenager, and go, wow, this is the band that I like the most, and you know, you listen to this rock and roll bands, 3, 4, 5 that are like, oh, your formative years, and then they stick, and then you become an adult and things don't change anymore. Kind of like, could it be connected? I don't know. It's just a question.
I think to an extent where I to an extent I would admit to that, because it's something that I just like. I'm fully aware if I was born in another part of the world and perhaps I was born to a Muslim family, then I would be Muslim, and hopefully I would be a good Muslim the same way I try to be a good Christian. And so I fully acknowledge that it's part the reason I'm Christian is because of an accident of birth. But at the same time, like I said, this is just the tradition that I choose to go deep in and affirm other people's traditions where they go deep in. And even like, I think sometimes I word it as, I'm not saying this is the absolute truth, the absolute religion, and all the other ones are false, but or the absolute symbols, because it's all symbols. All religions are like signposts pointing to the divine, trying to attempt to explain the divine. And these just happen to be my favorite symbols. But at the same time, you don't pick your favorites. Like that music that you got into in high school, it just happened to you. You couldn't choose. Or you think of like your favorite food. You didn't choose your favorite food. It just happens to you. It catches on to you, latches on to you, and you can't get rid of it. And that's kind of where I'm at with Christianity.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to think like, could it be connected, you know, with those formative years when you're like a teenager or something, and then bah, it sets in stone, and then it's your thing for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty similar kind of experience to what Damon was talking about. Of realizing, I think I would have been at some point in high school that if I was born somewhere else, then I would have been raised with different cultural traditions, and that would have given me a totally different framework to work within. But at the same time, you know, your beliefs and the way that you interact with that thing do evolve over time, because I'm a very different type of Christian. Well, I mean, if I even take the label at all these days, to what I was when I was a kid, because like the church I grew up in was more conservative than I gave it credit for. Like I come from a very progressive family, but grew up in a conservative church. And then had a bunch of atheist friends in high school who were all a bit smarter than me. So I had to wrestle a lot with the ideas about evolution and you know how valid gay people are and all this other kind of stuff. But then coming through that, like the version of Christianity that I adopt and utilize is a lot more sophisticated now because. Well, actually, no. Sorry, it's not more sophisticated. If anything, it's simpler because there's a lot of sort of human stuff that has been knocked away through that, because I think it's important when you're talking about religion, I guess, to separate the human institution from the actual core of it, I guess. And so over time I've kind of knocked away more of the human institution side of things and have been more trying to get at the actual core of religion with what it's actually getting at and the part of the human experience that it taps into.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's a common thing that a lot of people say. Like, you want to get rid of the institution of religion, but you want to keep the values of religion. But then I'm wondering if that kind of idea is also in some ways like insensitive to like the tradition of different religions. Would you say so, or is that something that you guys are also advocating for?
I think it's a little complicated because, I don't really want to speak outside of a Christian context because Christianity is the one that I've existed in. And yeah, I guess for me, the way that I view it, and Damon, you might know a bit more than I have because I haven't studied this stuff directly in quite as much depth as you, um, but it seems to me that a lot of ideas of Christianity, sort of probably around the time that it got adopted by the Roman Empire, sort of got co-opted by power structures and then have been kind of utilized in a somewhat bastardized form in order to wield that power and to use it as another method of control, while sort of seeming authentic enough to sort of not raise too many questions. Which, I mean, I imagine that's probably an overly cynical version of it, but so I remember an idea that stuck that someone mentioned to me once when I was a teenager that stuck with me quite a lot was pointing out that when you read the gospel, the church is a lot closer to being the Pharisees than the disciples, which, given that it's the religious institution, is a pretty small jump. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you point out, like, a lot of people point to that moment in somewhere in the 4th or 5th century when when Christianity went from being a religion that was persecuted to the official religion of the Roman Empire through Constantine. And that moment, a lot of people point to as that's when the church went wrong. That's when it got institutional. And that's where it all went downhill. And some people say, therefore, give it up. Or some people even say, therefore, let's try to seek a Christianity that looks exactly like it did before then. And really what people
make
don't talk
Christianity
enough
great
about.
again.
Yeah. Really what people don't talk enough about is when that happened, what also happened on the sidelines was a guy named Saint Benedict of Nursia went into the desert and started his own community of the Desert Fathers and Desert Mothers, and really started some people may recognize the rule of Saint Benedict, which was the beginning of monastic life. And they dedicated themselves to work and prayer away from the institution where they could do their own thing and focus on serving the poor and trying to focus on the radical roots of the Jesus message outside of the institution, outside of the empire. And that continued. So it's like the institution continues, and that monastic life of people who are trying to commit to the radical root of this thing has always continued as well. So it's like each point in history you could point to the awful violence that the church has done, and at the same time point to a group of Christians who are doing the complete opposite as an alternative. So while, like, my favorite examples during the Crusades, St. Francis of Assisi was around. His birth and death was still during the Crusades, and during that time you could ask, what's Christianity? People would point to the Crusades, while he started this whole movement called the Lesser Brothers, where they're completely committed to living among the poor and serving the poor, and he became like the most famous saint after his death. And I'm inspired by that today, to where it's like people say, well, what's Christianity? And they point to people like Trump and conservatives and anti-abortion or anti-gay and stuff. And it's like, well, I'm going to choose to live a different life. I know that's there, but that's not part of my world. I'm living completely differently, like plenty of other people have, following a radical stream that has always existed.
Yeah,
If you want to go like historical about it, it's like it was the classical age. It's like things work differently. They don't work like today's politics. Power, it was something that you grabbed onto, and it was the right thing to do. Like it's not like after we cannot analyze old history as if it were like post Enlightenment history. It's absolute BS. Religion and power were inseparable. There had to be a state religion, yes or yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a different time. You cannot analyze and make a parallel and say, yeah, this or that religion is inherently evil because it held an empire back in the day in that age. It's like anything before the Middle Ages, even. it's culturally absolutely alien to us as we exist now and here in the 21st century, after the Enlightenment, after the Industrial Revolution, after Marx. It's there's no point of comparison, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
And I think that's an interesting point, because another criticism of bringing any kind of spirituality into politics is this idea that that would immediately lead to like the power of like I guess people point to the fact that in the past religious institutions have abused that power. And so what would your response be to that, to like to, because we're all in favor of kind of bringing some elements of spirituality or spiritual practices back into politics. But how would you respond to those kind of people who make those kind of claims?
Make which claims?
Like make like the idea that bringing religion into politics or bringing spirituality into politics is inherently bad, is an inherently bad idea.
I mean, I think it's probably it goes again back into that conflation of the institution and the core again, because I think bringing spirituality into politics to me means something very different to bringing the church into a position of power within politics. For me, like, yeah, spirituality itself is not the problem. The problem are the power structures that have come up around or masqueraded as spirituality. And so you then kind of go into, the power structures themselves are more the problem for me. It doesn't really matter what brands the people who are wielding it. I mean, it matters a little bit because, better policy is better policy, but past a certain point, whoever's wielding it doesn't really make too much of a difference, because it's still going to, maintain and possibly even exacerbate, current systems of oppression, which not a big fan of as a leftist.
Yeah, I mean, and when you use the word wield, I think it's a key word there. Like you can use spirituality to fuck people up, or you can use spirituality to lift people up. It's like a hammer. You can use it to build a nice house and do some nice woodwork, or you can bash someone's head with it. And spirituality is just one vector that we need to work with.
Yeah. And it's something that you can't get rid of either. I know some communists of the past felt like part of their mission of forming communism was to abolish religion and faith, and it didn't work. They just had to kill people at times because they wouldn't give it up, or they would just celebrate in secret or participate in secret. And I recently found this thing where in part of the First International, some Bakunin and some other anarchists were suggesting that they declare their group as atheist and make it a prerequisite to join the First International. And Marx mockingly responded saying, as if one could by royal decree abolish faith. And they felt like it was nonsense to try to abolish religion or try to suppress religion. They weren't religious at all, and they didn't have sympathies toward religion. They just felt like it would be a waste of time.
Yeah, and it's you can understand that there are, even when you're not religious at all. Say, I do understand perfectly because it's my experience, but you gotta understand that some other people have it in you guys, and it's fine. You need to be included in this change that we need, because we gotta make it together. It cannot be uniformity. Like in the video that you made, Damon, about forbidding Christmas and people celebrating Christmas in secret.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and in that video, I said that I'm not for state Christianity or state atheism. I'm for state secularism, so that everyone can have the freedom to be what they want.
Yeah, what the state should guarantee, or a government, because with the word state is kind of problematic with our fellow anarchists, which is absolutely right. It's a matter of linguistics. So a government must guarantee everybody's freedom to practice whatever spiritual practice they want in their lives, or lack thereof. Either option. It's just guarantee that everything is covered. And but we also need to be super careful on how some bad faith people will use religion in some of the properties of religion that it has to extinguish critical thinking. and we need to be careful with that, whether we're religious or not. It's just to catch those people in the act, saying, "Hey, yo, you're doing this wrong. Yeah, just stop it. Don't manipulate people." Like I think one of the strongest suits of the evangelical church is like they use like a lot of techniques that people enter in trances and you don't need to explain stuff, right? Because you're high in your own, kind of uh, crazy stuff. I don't know. It looks very dangerous, and it explains like a lot of Trumps and Bolsonaros and so on. And the fact that those organizations, not as spiritual practices, but as organizations, are lifting up the neo-fascists, and also using some of those techniques, say, to suppress critical thinking, to grow their numbers, is very worrying.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one thing that Angie Speaks talks a lot about on her channel, how by completely rejecting spirituality and everything like that, we're sort of leaving a vacuum for the far right to swoop in and like take this area from us and like use it to manipulate people to go to a far more right wing ideas. Like we need to take these ideas into account. I also think it's interesting because I think capitalism has become a new religion in a lot of ways. I think the way in which people sort of worship and have this blind faith in market logic, and the fact that even businesses are almost like monasteries these days. They have beds for you. They have sorry, it's the sirens. Yeah, they have like monasteries. They have like meditation rooms, and I don't know. It's really. We even have like people like Richard Branson that are like the new, what do you call them? Like religious people that you look up to. I don't know what you call them. Deities. I don't know. Would you guys agree that capitalism is almost like a new religion?
Yeah, definitely. And that's what's funny too, is I find certain atheists I talk to, it's like, great that you're an atheist, but you're clearly, that is what you want to if that's what you want to commit to, sometimes you're not atheistic enough, because you just replaced God with neoliberalism, or replaced God with chase after success, or some other big other that you've just replaced everything with. And so I think atheism in itself, which is like, I guess, the challenge of these big others, or believing in something that the oppressive powers of religion. And so I think that's valuable, and a healthy atheism is value in every sense, and we need to be able to use that to be atheistic toward those gods as well, the god of capitalism, neoliberalism, that try to seek to control us through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I'm just my sounds up a little. I think that the thing about religion is that I think it taps into a certain, if you want to put it in secular terms, like a certain psychological set of needs that humans have, because the fact that community is such a big part of it, and there's quite often a lot of things like stillness and meditation, which like there's a lot of scientific evidence now to say that that's a good idea. Singing in groups is great for communal bonding and all this other kind of stuff. And so there's to broaden it out to a bunch of things I can't think of off the top of my head now, there is some list of human needs that are sort of fairly intangible, that are catered to by religion, and we as humans will find some way to get those needs met. And some kind of belief in a higher power seems to be part of it. And if you consider yourself an atheist, then that basically just means, like from what I've seen in a lot of people, is that it becomes then just being blind to what it is that they're placing as a higher power, which then makes you susceptible to being exploited by people who will kind of come in to seem like they are filling that role, be that fascist, capitalist, cult leaders, the list goes on. And so one of the big advantages of spiritual practice, in my mind, is basically taking control of that and finding ways to make sure that that those very human needs are met somewhere that is safe and healthy, and is actually sustainable, I guess. Because if you have a strong sense of community, and if you have a regular amount of stillness, then you have time to sort of just be, and you have a certain level of emotional calm, so that you're not always acting out of some kind of panic or something. And so if you have those needs met there, then that means you're actually less susceptible to the desires that capitalism is trying to stir up in us all the time to promote consumerism and all that. So yeah, like that by the way, is a big part of the reason why I think that spiritual practice and spirituality is so important to have as part of whatever kind of revolution we're working towards or in the process of, depending on how you view the very abstract concept of revolution. And yeah, and something I can't remember what I was going to say in response to before, but something I thought of before was that the kind of spiritual change that I'd like to see, and this is jumping up a little bit, so for me, spiritual change is the internal change, and a kind of thing that changes the way that you view the world, which can quite often happen through things like art and all that kind of stuff. But if we were able to sort of shed our desire for power and other sort of more egoistic things, then that would fundamentally change the way that we operate as humans, and then we wouldn't need to continue building the types of power structures and feeling like the only way we can gain any kind of security as an individual is by having power over other people. And so if we were able to, sort of engage with our humanity in such a way that promoted things that could circumvent that or give or fulfill whatever needs we have through somewhere else, then that would mean that, there's the revolution right there. Then all of a sudden we don't need hierarchies.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like the spirituality at times at its worst is just trying to get their guy in power who just says all the right things, and spirituality at its best, it teaches people how to take care of one another so that they don't need people in power and rulers over them.
Yeah.
And I think that's extremely important. It reminds me too, Rosa Luxemburg said, in criticizing the way that terror was used in the Russian Revolution, said that we need a spiritual transformation. A socialism demands a spiritual transformation of the masses. And in order to, because of the way that they've been degraded by capitalism.
Yeah, I love that.
We could say that a healthy spirituality could give you tools to resist the other wave of manipulation coming through let's say advertising or neoliberalism dogma or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It gives you what you. I think a big part of spirituality is to learn to be satisfied with what is in front of you. And when you're able to be satisfied within yourself and within your community, you could realize, you could be more open to the lies that people are telling you, that you need this to make you happy, you need that to make you feel satisfied. And when you can know, no, actually, there's only a few things I need, not all of that, then can really help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although small caveat to add on that, of course, is that that's not to replace fulfilling people's material needs as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how would you because there's this I feel like a lot of leftists have this idea that all we need is like a material revolution, and then a lot of spiritualists would say no, we need a spiritual revolution, and it's just something that I'm like also trying to sort of think about as well. I don't really have a good answer to this, but how do you guys, when you think about revolution, how do you think we can sort of reconcile the two, or do you think that one is more important than the other, first of all?
Can I say my catchphrase?
Go for it.
Why not both?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Yeah. I personally feel like they're just about inseparable. Well, no, they're not inseparable, but I kind of feel like they can feed into each other very naturally. Because if you look at the ministry of Jesus, he pretty much always did both at the same time. He would because the act of helping someone who's in need, like that. Oh, hang on. Okay, I've got a story I wanted to say to tell at some point in the stream. I think the time has come. So, this is going to be a bit roundabout, so strap yourselves in. So I was catching up with an old friend of mine. Like he's been like family friends of my family for years and years and years. And he's been in Melbourne, like the next city over from Adelaide, where I am, for like, you know, because I've got a bigger art scene and he's in theatre and stuff. So we caught up because he knows that I also make stuff. And we were talking about stuff, and he asked how things were going, and I said, you know, I've applied for the doll, it hasn't come through yet, so I don't have any money. And he was like, yeah, I don't have any money either, but I'll shout you coffee. So he did, and we talked for a while, and then after a while we went over to the pub, and he shouted me, I think 2 jugs of beer or something, and and it was only because, like, you know, he knows what it's like to have no money, and and we were having a good chat, so he kept going. And at the end of it, just as we were about to leave, I pulled out one of my poetry books, which I was always intending on giving him, without charging him. And yeah, and when I gave it to him, he said, "Oh, do you want any money?" I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, this is worth way more than a couple of beers." And the thing that I realized from that is that, to me, I'd already broken even on my poetry books, and so for me, the beers were actually worth more than the poetry book's worth, but for him, the poetry book was worth more than the beers were. And so we'd actually gotten more out of the exchange than the monetary value of what had gone back and forth. Because the way that we subjectively valued those things was different, but also like what that did to our relationship, the kind of trust that had built up. So there was more than just a poetry book and 2 jugs of beer that had gone back and forth. And that, I think, is what happens when you when you meet people's material needs when they're in need. You're not just giving them the thing itself. You're also reminding them, hey, they're like, you know, we're all human here. There are people, either friends or strangers, that, like, whatever your relationship to them is, that want you to be okay. And that's a deeply powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the kind of thing that spreads. And that, I think, is that to me is sort of the mechanical core of Jesus's ministry. It's love is an action, and when you do the action, you kind of create more love, and if you love people, you create more action, and it kind of goes back and forth over and over like that. So you can just sort of distribute everything and have some like numerical way of figuring out who's got how many points worth of stuff or whatever, and do the the liberal idea of how communism works, which is quite soulless and will get people's material needs met. But it's like being fed by a machine. Like, I'd take a home cooked meal anytime, because I would rather the experience of having someone cook for me, because that's a big relational thing. I guess that's sort of what I'm trying to say, is that the material and the spiritual can feed into each other quite easily, and I think in the best version of things, they do inherently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I feel like it's, yes, absolutely, material revolution, and the spiritual side is what provides like the engine, the power behind the material revolution. And I think religion, particularly Christianity, first and foremost, is about a movement for transformation of our material reality, first and foremost. And there are, even if we talk about the spiritual myths that are talked about and believed in, and symbols, believing in those symbols and myths have material consequences. And so there is no getting away from the material. And even like, I think of like Jesus' first disciples, if you were to ask them, which a lot of people hear this question a lot. A lot of people in spiritual circles will say, "How's your spiritual life?" Back then, they would have no idea what you're talking about. They would have no clue.
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. Your spiritual life? You mean my life? And I think back then it was, I probably pre-Enlightenment, I would say it was like all one singular life, and it was all together.
Mm-hmm.
And even like people talk about this idea. You can kind of argue that Christianity, in a way, invented world religions, because they went around trying to evangelize to other countries, and before trying to convince them to become Christians, they try to figure out what their religion was. But for them, it was just how they lived in their culture. And then Christians were like, "Okay, that's your religion. You're Hindu." They're like, I guess this is just how we live, though. But
Really? That's so interesting. Wow.
yeah. So yeah, it's part of life. Purely, it's inseparable from the material.
One thing I would say though is sometimes I have found that, and this isn't a problem inherently with being spiritual, but some spiritual people, I feel like it can become such an individualistic thing. It's like trying to enlighten yourself or focusing purely on making yourself the most spiritually pure or good person, and then completely sort of neglecting social relations or anything broader because you're so focused on this individual journey to enlightenment or whatever it is. And so I think that, but yeah, again, it's not like, I guess it's the same as what we were saying earlier. It completely depends on how you use these things. But I think that that has been one of my frustrations in the past with certain people that I have had in my life who are religious or spiritual. But is how can we? Well, I don't want to say how can we prevent that because that sounds like we're trying to manipulate people. But how? Why is that a sort of a thing that has come about? And is there a way we can prevent it from going that way? Is that capitalism creeping into spirituality, making us believe it's this individualistic thing, or is it like something else?
I would say so. I would say like neoliberal individualism is to blame, and it just seeped in. And I grew up in a Pentecostal church initially, and Pentecostals are the evangelicals who really believe in spiritual gifts. That includes like speaking in tongues and being slain in the spirit and dancing around and exorcism of demons at times. And so that I grew up around a lot of that, and a lot of talk of spiritual gifts and what are your spiritual gifts. You have to define your spiritual gifts, which it could include prophesying or teaching or wisdom or hospitality and stuff like that, and a bunch of things. And so it's about like finding your spiritual gift. And it's interesting because there are some Bible passages in the New Testament that talk about the church having spiritual gifts and using them in order to build up one another. And yet, when I grew up, it was always talked about very individualistically. Like, for example, the whole speaking in tongues thing. I grew up around multiple older men who were very upset and discouraged that they couldn't do it, and everyone else in the church, they felt like everyone else in the church could. And multiple moments where we would all pray for that person so that they can have it like everyone else.
Damn.
And nothing would happen, and they would feel discouraged once again. And yet, when we see it talked about in the New Testament, Paul says, when all of you come together, one of you will speak a spiritual language, one of you will preach, and one of you will have a word of wisdom, and one of you will have a song. It was about the community will have the spiritual gifts. Not every single individual needs to have every gift, but someone will have some gift, and when we all come together, they will all be present and will be able to build one another up. And so I realized like how messed up that was, that I grew up in an environment where I was made to feel like I need to be gifted at everything. I need to know how to do everything, when really it's about we need to find a community where everyone there has some of these gifts. And lastly, I'll say too, like another example, the way we individualize scriptures. A classic one people like to quote is this idea, this saying, God will not give you more than you can handle, which is a verse from Colossians. But the thing is, that word you there, the English kind of messes it up because the word you is plural you. So it's better to read as God will not give you all something more than you all as a community can handle. As individuals, we get stuff way more than we can handle all the time. And so that's one of the ways it's been like mixed up.
Yeah, I'm a big...
Go for it.
Sorry, you go.
Okay, no, that's all right. I'm a big fan of of the image of the body of Christ myself, because that is a perfect harmony between individuality and collectivism. For me, it's the idea that we all do need to come together and play a role, but we all have our own little individual thing that we as a person can do, because. Yeah, I guess for me as someone who spent most of their life feeling like I wasn't quite nerdy enough to hang out with the nerds, not quite cool. I'm cool enough to hang out with anyone else, and a lot of other things like that. So not feeling like I was the same as people in a lot of ways. Sort of feeling like that there was a way that I, as a bit of an oddball, would have somewhere to fit in, and that I would just have a fairly niche role to play in whatever community I was part of, and that was really encouraging for me, because it sort of meant that I was able to, sort of focus on the things that gave me joy and that I was good at, and then it was a matter of just finding ways to turn that into something that I could then give to the people who were in my life, as opposed to just feeling awful that I didn't fit in anywhere. What was the original question that you got asked? Because I feel like I had something I was going to say on
People
that.
who individualize spirituality too much.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Just
Yeah.
individualistic.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Because I was going to say something about if it's a capitalist thing. I almost think it's. I actually think it's probably a bit older than that, because I would imagine that predating capitalism, there would have had to have been holier than thou culture, and other things where you kind of get fixated on one little thing that the Bible says is good to have, but is sort of meant in a more it's good to have if you have it kind of a way. But basically, I think humans, particularly when you get into human structures, we can become very over fixated on one small little thing and think that that's the most important thing, or that's the whole bit. And then that's when sort of that hierarchical thinking kind of seeps in, which definitely predates capitalism. Which I guess goes back to that whole thing of that's the kind of sort of moving beyond that is the kind of spiritual change we need.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because what you guys have mentioned, it really sounds as if it's almost become a competition within religion, like, I have this gift, you don't, or like I need to up you, like someone else in my community. And that's such a strange way to think. Or even my church isn't as popular as your church. Because I also grew up
or my religion's better than your religion is another one.
Yeah. I also grew up in a Christian household and went to church for years. But I really got put off by the fact that they were constantly, it was all about bringing more numbers in, converting people constantly. And it was less about actually building this great community and relationships within the church. And it was more about just conversion. Who else can you get to convert? And all these incentive schemes to bring that about. And I get it if that's, it was well intentioned, I guess, but it seemed much more about a money-making, profit-making scheme in a lot of ways. And that's just my experience. I don't know if that's a general issue when it comes to churches, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it actually goes all the way back to the Old Testament, because Israel, despite what God wanted, seemed to want for Israel, wanted to be a great nation with a great king, and now we're churches who want to be a great company with a great brand. It's the same phenomenon, just updated for neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Imperialism, right?
Yeah. I think I also have spoken about this a few times on the stream, but just how frustrated I've generally been recently in leftist spaces, because I think it is partially to do with the fact that this complete rejection of any spirituality, because there's so much still internalized patriarchy and internalized capitalist or individualistic thinking and criticism of other people for not being leftist enough or not doing the right things. And I don't know, it's often not been a nice space to be in. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that people aren't doing the internal work to look at themselves and say, and maybe I might be wrong about this, and maybe I shouldn't be thinking like this, and having some compassion for that person because they aren't where I'm at, or humility that I might be wrong, and etc. And I think that completely removing those spiritual practices completely makes these spaces not a good place, not a space that you really want to be in. And I don't know, I think it's just going to ruin our movement basically if we completely relinquish any of these things.
You mean completely removing collectively, right? Not individually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you as well about radical Christmas and what exactly this is, and because I have no idea. I haven't watched
Yeah.
your video on a Christmas yet.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of videos, a whole lot of videos on Christmas, because it's like I realized almost a month ago, it's like I'm the Christian in this leftist space, so I got to go all out for Christmas. And realizing like a lot of people don't realize like the radical root of the Christmas story. And it's so, first off, it's like there's the historic element, which is like what is the historical context that these stories were developed in, and what were the material consequences of people believing in these stories and within history. And then there's the mythic element, or the symbolic element, which is like what does the story mean and what is the message of the story. And for most of Christian history, we were fine like with believing in that and allowing it to empower us without exactly questioning the historicity of it. But and then post Enlightenment, the goalposts of truth got moved, and people felt like for something to be true, it needs to be proven factual. And the Christians did a bad job at responding to that by saying, "Oh, then everything in this Bible is factual and can be proven historically, then because we say it's still true." When throughout all history, we've always had truths that were true, not because they literally historically happened, but because there were more than literal, beyond literalism, so true that can only be expressed through symbols and metaphor and myth. And so the Christmas stories take place in that form of writing. And like you could read the whole Gospels by understanding Jesus told parables about God, and Jesus' followers told parables about Jesus. And the Gospels are Jesus' followers' parables about the life of Jesus. So parables are metaphor narrative, basically, or narrative metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And where it's like something happens, and then there's a twist in the end, and it's supposed to make you think about life and how you should live. Like the classic one is the Good Samaritan. There's a guy beaten on the side of the road, and some people walked by. This guy walked by, the priest walked by, the rich man walked by, but then a Samaritan, the guy you think wouldn't help anybody, stopped and helped him. It would be ridiculous after that to say, yeah, but Jesus, did that really happen? And if he says no, to say, oh, then it doesn't matter then. You're supposed to question that and have it challenge you. And I believe everything in the Bible is written that exact way, where if you're asked, yeah, but did that literally happen? You're missing the entire point. And they wouldn't know what you're talking about to ask, yeah, but did that literally happen? And so the Christmas stories are these parabolic overtures that start the Gospel of Matthew and Luke as a way of giving a summary of what they're trying to communicate with their Jesus story. And first off, it's really radical, the fact that they told this story within the context of the Roman Empire. So the historic element is something that just is radical enough without even getting to the mythic element. Because Augustus Caesar was Caesar when Jesus was born, and then Tiberius Caesar was Caesar when he was an adult. But Augustus Caesar was called the Son of God, the Savior of the world, the bringer of peace and prosperity. There was coins printed that said there is no other name under heaven by which one could be saved than that of Caesar. And they made a 12-day celebration of his birth called the Advent of Caesar. And when people would go to town to tell the story of Caesar's latest military conquest, it would be called a euangelion, bringing the euangelion to the next town. So we get the word gospel. And each town they would go to capture and make a part of the Roman Empire, they would say, declare Caesar as Lord. And if they said no, then they would be put on crosses. If they said yes, then they would be grafted into the Roman Empire, and that region would be called an ecclesia, which means we're church. Mm-hmm. So the first Christians took all these Roman imperial propaganda terms and said, actually, the guy you killed for trying to start a movement that would transform this world and replace your rule actually is the Son of God, Lord, Savior of the world, bringing reign of peace and prosperity, except not through global military violence, but through sacrificial love and justice. Mm-hmm. And so this story is inherently seditious and would get put on a cross and challenges power. And Mary, when she's told she's pregnant, doesn't say, "Yay, now we're all going to get saved and go to heaven." She says, "God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty." And there is a material nature to all this, that this world is being transformed through this story. And the material consequences of people believing this story is forming communities that help people see an alternative to Roman imperialist realism, you could possibly say, and realize like there's another way to live. And it's that's like powerful just in the historic element alone. And I think that is something where we should realize that this season is a season where we could be reminded that those who say they're in power and they're going to be in power forever, power always ends. There's no such thing as limitless power. And this story is exactly about that there is a power beyond the human powers and that power is always seeks liberation from these earthly big powers that oppress others.
Yeah, but again, it's a narrative. It's not even like it's not historically accurate. Nothing to be taken like literally.
Yeah,
it's just a story
Wow.
to make you think.
That's fascinating.
But that was taken for granted. I would say pre-Enlightenment, that was just taken for granted, and people wouldn't think like that. But now, like we know a little bit better, but we could say that it's something. Like I like Marcus Borg has a book called Reading the Bible Again for the First Time that I really love, where he talks about how initially we read the Bible from a naive lens, just believing the whole thing exactly as it is. And then there's the critical lens, realizing its historical context and what can be proven factually. And then there's post-critical naivety, where you can understand the way that this is written, the purpose, and seek the message and the meaning of it beyond if it literally happened or not. That's the real question we need to be asking with all these Bible stories. What does it mean? What is the message?
Yeah, what is the truth of the story?
Yeah.
Which, I feel like that's, I mean, as someone who, sort of likes telling stories, it's part of my thing. The fact that people don't seem to be, I was about to say people don't seem to want to, but I don't think that's it. I think people aren't accustomed to really trying to find the truth in a story as much as they may have been in the past. I was about to say have been, but I don't know. But because I guess it's kind of going back to that. I've been on this whole idea of sort of moving beyond quantifiability a little bit, and because I think people quite often get stuck in the more material, quantifiable elements of stories rather than actually looking for the more transcendental. What is the deeper truth, which I guess is its own kind of spiritual practice in a way, is finding the truth in things. I don't even know what I'm saying.
Finding the deeper truth.
Yeah. But so when you say that a lot of it is sort of stories and you're getting messages from the stories, how do you think of God? Do you see him or her or it as like, this thing in the sky sort of thing, or is it another story that serves some kind of purpose or to get some kind of meaning from?
You go.
I don't have anything particular yet, so you go.
Okay.
Go on.
I would say the ways when you read the biblical narrative, and this is and the same with several other sacred texts as well, God is omni-nameable because God is unnameable. And so there's this constant symbols for God. God is peace giver and warrior. God is king and peasant. It's like there's all of these ways of describing God because there's not a anonymity of God, but a hypernym of God, where it is so incomprehensible that you have to say all kinds of words to try to describe God. The same we treat the same way with people we love, where your lover is omni-nameable. You cannot express how you actually feel about your lover. So you give them all kinds of names and say all kinds of things to try to describe them. But at the same time, each and every description fails to capture what you're trying to say. And that I say is with God as well, where God whatever God is can't be contained within our names and descriptions. It's like I remember seeing this meme one time where it was like concept of God 1, concept of God 2, concept of God 3, God, like completely separate from that. And it's something that I think, like I also love the tradition of the mystics and the apophatic tradition of the mystics. There's cataphatic prayer and talk, and apophatic. Cataphatic is affirmative language of God. God is such and such. Apophatic is God is not. Negative theology or prayer to say God. And it's usually in response to cataphatic, because you could say God is love, but at the same time you must say, but God is not love the way I understand it, or the way 16th century Irish farmer would understand it, or the way anyone would understand it. There's something I am acknowledging that it is a failure to describe at the same time. And so theology for me starts there with a form of atheism, to where we can get rid of all our images and symbols of God. And like Paul Tillich said, theology starts with atheism. And the 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart would pray, God, rid me of God, which I love that prayer, because it's saying, rid me of any of these images and conceptions and symbols that I may think is God. Rid me of that so that I can try to experience what is actually there. And theology starts there, because then once we've gotten rid of all these human conceptions and constructions, we can then say, and yet something is still being experienced in a variety of ways. What is that? How can we describe that? And at that point, you have to start getting into like a poetics even, and talking about the depth of experience of whatever this is that we're trying to describe.
Wouldn't you think that there's like a concept of God for every single, like a different concept of God for every single person that happens to be spiritual? Like,
Yeah,
would you think that's
and
the
that's a
case?
construction. Yeah, and that's a kind of a construction for each person that you have to wrestle with and deconstruct. And like people, forget who said it. It might have been, forget who said it. Somebody famously said that God creates us in our image, in His image, and then we return the favor. To where we so constantly and that's something that atheism and reading atheist critiques of religion has helped me with a lot, of get rid of the God that is just my projection, and help me rediscover a more honest, responsible spirituality, because by reading about all the ways that we just create God with our own innate biases, and deconstruct that, get rid of that, rid me of that God, so that I can explore what's underneath all of it.
Yeah, but wouldn't you think that, you know, when then there's the case of organized religions, then we could face like when you're trying to standardize and get into that which is something I I think I said it a lot in this stream, but it's good to ask you people, because you're more knowledgeable about this stuff than me. Don't you think that when you have something that intimate, that concept, that it's unique to you, when somebody's trying to reach out with their fingers and standardize that so everybody feels God in a unified way, make it into a big movement religion thing, like an organized religion, that would not be in itself a spiritual act, but an act of power?
To do what?
I would probably say so. To standardize the image of God. I think it's so.
Yeah.
If everyone
Just to
has their
say
own
that this is
conception,
literally all
it?
God is, yeah.
Yeah. I think my understanding of God has become, I don't know, I think I'm in a weird spot these days, because I'm simultaneously more agnostic than I've ever been, but also my faith is stronger than it's ever been lately. Because I in a way, and I have to say in a way, because this is simultaneously all of what I believe, and also only a small part of it, and also not at all what I believe. But I quite often find myself thinking of God as a metaphor for part of the human experience, which is so like not thinking of God as a separate entity at all, but is in fact part of just the human drive to do good in the world in a way. You know, the drive that we have to care for people in our community, even people who aren't, to make things that didn't exist previously, and that it's all just a metaphor for just the quirks of being a human, but there's part of us that we need to be following and listening to, which won't surprise those of you who've seen my video on the Verbis Manifesto. But But then at the same time, I think it's I think that's also a very limiting view, and that's also not how I actually act as though that's. I don't actually act as though that's what I believe, even though the differences would be quite subtle. Because and this is sort of where you get into the very strange parts of sort of Christian theology and talking about God and stuff. And if you've ever heard any Christian talk about the Trinity, you'll know that it's all just a mash of contradictions that when you kind of squint at it, it starts making sense in a strange way. So similar to so in the idea of the Trinity is you've got three aspects of God that are all the same and yet simultaneously separate. In a similar kind of a Schrodinger's cat kind of a situation, I kind of believe that God is a separate entity and also not at all a separate entity and a metaphor for itself and all this other weird stuff that's very difficult to describe. But at the same time, I feel like on an intuitive level, I'm kind of getting closer and closer to the sense that I think Jesus is trying to tap into when he talks about, like when he gives all of his parables about what the kingdom of God is, because it talks about what the kingdom, so the kingdom of God is basically, so it's almost like a utopian vision in a way. It's kind of like this is the thing that we're aiming for, is sort of what it is. But Jesus never describes it directly; he only talks about what it's like, and so it's like a treasure in a field that someone finds and then buries again, and then buys the land that it's on just to own it. And there's a lot of something that you come across that's just so great you have to let go of absolutely everything. And there's a lot of people behaving very strangely because they've had this changing experience. And I've had a lot of those changes around the certain sense within me, but it's not just the sense that drives me spiritually. It's also merged into and basically become like almost a unified thing with what drives me politically as well. And so I'm rapidly getting to the point where I can almost boil the gospel down to become an anarchist, like become an anarcho-communist. Because the force that drives me in both is so similar that it may in fact be the same thing, which I've found quite interesting. So in answer to your question, in way too many words, I don't really know.
Yeah, I would also say like how you said people think it's just a word for human experience. It reminds me, Nietzsche one time said the only reason we cannot rid ourselves of God is because we still believe in grammar. And so this idea that we are still just talking about this stuff, that we can't get away from it. And I think to an extent that's true, where you could kind of say the name God is a placeholder for a long history of spiritual traditions that have helped people dive deep into the depth dimension of life. And I would say, like, the beginning of atheism is to say, I'm completely happy and content and satisfied with reality in the world and describing reality in the world exactly as it is. But then I would say, but then after that, you need to still seek some sort of depth in life. It doesn't have to be religion. For many people, it is religion. And there's a whole bunch of directions you could go with religion because of the historical element of it. But if it's not that, then there needs to be some other depth, like through art or music or poetry. And it's something that people are able to encounter the symbolic truth, big T truth, through and that is encountered through other forms of depth as well. And even think like people who, like anti-theists who try to get people to stop believing in God, to me feels silly in the same way that if Walt Whitman were to write Leaves of Grass and then the next day somebody were to grab a hold of it and then get in contact with him and say, the world isn't really the way you described in this book though, right? And you would realize that Walt Whitman would know this just went over this person's head. They have no idea what they're talking about, and that they don't realize that it's true in a different category of meaning.
Yeah.
Because Walt Whitman wouldn't say, well, I didn't mean it, because he did mean it, but it's just in a different category of meaning. And I think I see religion the same way.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's interesting as well to think about the fact that so much of the time when we dismiss religions and spiritual practices, it's incredibly neo-colonial and paternalistic, especially as a lot of indigenous communities and a lot of places across the globe still like religion and spiritual practices is like a key part of like the way they live. So for us to completely just dismiss it as something that's that's stupid or like no one should practice this is like us as leftists just doing the exact thing that we're supposed to be getting away from, which is this paternalistic neo-colonial way of thinking. So yeah.
We're basically just picking everything up from the Enlightenment, really, whereas there's so much more that happened before that, and a lot of things that were going on and things that have been weakened by a lot of the ideas of liberalism. And again, this is not to be like a make spirituality great again kind of a moment, but I think it is also important to understand that is a shift that happened, and that not every aspect of that shift has been positive. And so it's not that we need to go back, but I think it's important to figure out, is there a point before that that's better to pick up from with certain aspects? Because I think materialistic science, I think, is one of the great triumphs of liberalism, and I think that's kind of going along just fine. But spirituality, I think, is something that is only just starting to sort of make some new shifts again, because we've sort of mostly been existing with the human structures and the internal politics and the power dynamics and hierarchies and all that stuff over the last 100, 200 years, rather than certainly in current and former British colonies at any rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like thanks to the work of people like Richard Rohr, who's fantastic, and lots of other people like that who are really starting to open things up and sort of take things in a new direction while still keeping the essential core of things intact, I think is really important and good.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how the fundamentalists of each religious tradition always, of course, obviously seem so different from each other and they can't have a conversation. But the mystics of each tradition, the ones who are able to say, this is the way I describe this God, but I know at the same time it's a failure and I'm seeking something deeper. The mystics of each tradition are able to get along great. And even though they have different ways of describing things that contradict one another, when they understand this is my way of explaining, and at the same time it's a failure, we can get along and hear and benefit from hearing the ways that other religious traditions describe the same stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually think that the fundamentalist side are all that different. They just don't get along.
Yeah. That's true. They're refusing to get to that point.
It's different. It's different brands of hierarchy that have come up in different cultures and religions.
I mean, do you think when a religion taps into power, the power of the few, not the power of the people, it kind of fails at its own core, spiritual core, or its own or say, its own at its own mysticism, at its own actual core?
I would say so for Christianity in particular, especially in the way that Jesus talks about, like, he says, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Like, saying that is where you're going to find me, among the least of these, not among the powerful. And even says, blessed are the poor and the meek and those who are hungry and those who do not have. And woe to those who are rich and those who are full and those who have. And to me, that is showing that, like, the word blessed, we sometimes think as meaning we have a lot of cool stuff, but blessed there is a first century way of saying God is on your side. And so for Jesus to say that about the poor and the lowly and the least of these, he's saying that is where God is manifest, and among the powerful, God says, woe to you. And so when people do get power and they get to that level, God then, I believe, and symbolically, you could say, switches sides to the least of these, to those that are being oppressed by the power. And at that point, like I said, my Thanksgiving video, at that point, those who are colonized and oppressed by the Christian powers can say God is on our side now.
Yeah, and it should be like an important thing to tap out at that those mechanisms of denial of people who claim themselves to be religious and then, let's say vouch for these power structures. To tap into those disconnections, which is I think something you're doing, Damon, with your videos, tapping into those disconnections. Like you claim you're religious, but check it out. This is what our spirituality is trying to say, right? It's trying to convey.
I think it's actually even a little more dramatic than that, because if you look at sort of where a lot of the harshest punishments come from God in the Bible, like there's a lot of, God is not a fan of false prophets, and false prophets are what's the word, defined, as from my understanding, as people who use God's name to achieve non-godly ends, which is what taking the Lord's name in vain actually is about. It's not about sort of stubbing your toe and saying Jesus Christ. It's like it's about saying, hey, here's the word of God, when you don't actually have the word of God. And so it means that if you are claiming to be a representative of God, when in fact you're serving your own power interests, that is actually like one of the biggest crimes you can commit in the Bible. There's a reason why, like in the gospel, like the people who Jesus gets the most angry at are the Pharisees. The people who are the religious leaders who aren't properly taking care of people. So it's worse than just. I think it's like from a Christian standpoint, it's actually even worse than a lot of atheists think it is. It's not just you're not playing fair. It's no, you are doing like one of the biggest no-nos.
I wanted to also ask about, like, you both kind of mentioned this before, I guess, but when you think of like the kingdom of God or heaven, and other kind of ideas of what happens in the afterlife, I've found a lot of the time that has this effect of really depoliticizing a lot of people, because they end up thinking, well, we don't need to be political in our daily life because God will, like, we're going to be, I don't know, either God is going to come and rescue us, or I'm going to like go to heaven anyway. So what happens on earth doesn't matter. Suffering on earth doesn't matter, etc. But I've heard it said a lot of times that the kingdom of God is sort of something that is on earth right now. And I don't have an opinion. I don't really know. I personally don't believe in like a kingdom of God in like the afterlife, but I see it as more of something that exists or can. I kind of view it as this like communist utopia on earth, but that's just my opinion.
I ain't afraid of no ghost.
Pardon?
I ain't afraid of no ghost. Sorry, bad Ghostbusters reference.
I'm sort of seeing it more and more as how things are going to come about on Earth more and more, like in the future sense, because there's things where it talks about this world will pass away, there will be a new world, and for me, I think the new world is one where we have moved beyond operating in hierarchical manners. I think that's at least a more useful way of thinking about it than an afterlife. I don't know. My opinion on anything to do with afterlives is I really don't know. I'm acting as though this is all I've got because that's going to keep me moving. But as far as the kingdom of God being something that exists here and now, I think it is a glimpse of what's to come. It's a glimpse of things operating as they should be. And to go back to the story of when I met up with my friends and we swapped beer for a poetry book. Like that to me, like that's a real glimpse of the kingdom of God. It's those interactions where you get more than the sum of the parts of the exchange, where it's built more on reciprocity rather than just like balancing numbers, I guess. And something that I've wanted to do for like the last probably week, because this is only as long as I've had the idea, is sort of turning, like I haven't been good at praying regularly for a long time, but something that I think might get me back into it is doing it as an exercise of meeting up with a friend and talking about where we've seen the kingdom of God in the last week, which I think it would be incredibly powerful, because it's positive, it's motivating, and it keeps you focused on what you need to be working on and working towards. So I guess that kind of answers the question, more or less, I think.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, and it's interesting. Like Lenin had said in Socialism and Religion, his essay said something like, "We care more about unifying a proletarian opinion on paradise on earth more than paradise on heaven." And as a Christian, I say I totally agree, and that's like I think the root message of Christianity as well, the material transformation here, and Jesus even tells his followers to pray, "Your kingdom come on earth," and
Yes.
it's something like the whole. Also, yeah, you said how there's verses where it talks about this world passing away and a new world. That Greek word there's aeon for world, which can mean world, but better translated like era or age. And so the Jewish framing of time when this stuff was written was there's this age, and there's the previous age, and some ages before that, and the age to come, the next age, and some ages after that. And how they would understand difference in ages is when those who are in power fall, then a new power comes, and that is a new age. And so when that's what they meant when they said like this world will go away, this age will go away, and there will be someone else, they're largely referring to Caesar and the Roman Empire. That power will eventually cease, and there will be something after in the age to come. And hopefully it's a just age and not just another oppressive one like this one. And it's all about that. In the Jewish tradition, there is no idea of an afterlife or living after. And in the Christian tradition, I believe some of the afterlife stuff was adopted with the Greek influence. And the Christian tradition, there's Hellenized Jews who are by Greek influence who became Christian initially. And within Greek ideas was this three-tiered universe of there's up there is the good, and then there's us right here, and down there is the bad, and there's Hades, and up there is Zeus. And they developed this idea using that framework by seeing the oppression that they're going through and feeling like there's no way that this can be it, because we are following God and committed to this, and yet we are still suffering. There has to be some sort of life after this where we can get some sort of reward, and some sort of life after this where those who are punishing or are oppressing us can be punished. And that, I think, initially started as a hope and eventually became like dogma. And really, there is the way Jesus talks is all about this life right here, right now, how to transform this life right here, right now. And like I said, in the Jewish tradition, there's no afterlife. And in the book, in the Hebrew Bible, Ecclesiastes, which is my favorite book of the whole Bible, I want to read this real quick. I love this so much for myself, how I see it, where he said in Ecclesiastes 3:18, he says, "As for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they're like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them?" And
Wow, I love that.
I love Ecclesiastes so much. If you're ever having a day that you think is just a little too upbeat, maybe read Ecclesiastes.
yeah, definitely. So I'm like that too, where like I don't know what's gonna happen after I die. Hopefully it'll be cool, but ultimately I know it's about this life alone. And also like what Simon Critchley said. Kester Bruin was interviewing him and asked him, "Do you believe in an afterlife?" And he said, "Yes, I believe in the life that comes after me." And I think
Wow.
that, especially from a socialist sense, we can see with the movement that I believe that this movement will continue and will continue to get more and more just.
Climate change allows us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like something will keep living on this planet if humans all die out. You know, the plants will be doing great, so it's not like there'll be nothing alive.
There's a little
It'll just look different.
there's a little bit that we should update about the kingdom of God. It's like it's been like around 2,000 years. We should make it into the democratic republic of God.
Oh yeah, that was the other thing I needed to say. I actually put up a video this morning that talked exactly about what the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven is. It's the Greek is Basileia Uranus. Basileia is how they translate kingdom, but it's pretty bad translation, mainly because of what we think of when we hear kingdom, super patriarchal and like a local palace and stuff. But that word Basileia is better translated as like rule or reign, not a local place. And then Uranus is the word heaven or heavens. It's better translated. The heavens is in reference to the universe and everything in it. So it's about saying the way that the rule according to the entire universe. And they believe that rule was primarily liberation, because they believe that the God who created them starts the story by liberating them out of slavery in Egypt. And so when we see that the rule of this world is going by oppression, we know that we need to pray and hope and fight for the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the rule of the universe, which is liberation. And so it's pretty much exactly what would the world look like if this God was in charge? And really that would look like not having any of these rulers or hierarchies.
I mean, who would have thought that some idiot would have, twisted the meaning in the way?
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Humans love a bit of security, and getting power over other people is a great way to show up your own position. So it's unfortunately anything that can be exploited for power pretty much will be, which is kind of why you have to get to the root of the problem of spiritual healing and all that kind of stuff for lasting change to really be possible. Just to bring us back to wherever we were talking about that.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk a bit about like where to go from here, as for people watching and for us as well. What would you say we need to be doing as leftists or as spiritual people to kind of get leftists to see the importance of spirituality, or get spiritual people to recognize how political spirituality is, or how political everything is, and that we need to start thinking more about leftism, etc. Like, how can we build this type of movement? I guess this is quite a broad, difficult kind of question, but I don't know. What would your hope be for us for the things that we should start doing?
I would say for spiritual people to look for the radical core of their spiritual traditions and find the parts that does make this about the material reality and go all in on that, and acknowledge like a lot of the stuff in there about the afterlife, like we can't really say for sure, but go all in on the material consequences of our spiritual tradition and find a way to have that empower us to seek a better world. And for the non-religious people, I would say seek depth in some way, and whether that's spirituality or not, and acknowledge that people who are spiritual and religious, that's just the way that they seek depth. And I think, I love Oscar Wilde and his essay Man Under Socialism, where he talks about an individualism that happens after socialism, after we're in a socialist society where we're able to truly live the way that we want. That's what we say individualism is today, but it's not. That's not what individualism is today. And when we're able to, by creating a socialist society, then we could start to truly discover ourselves deeper and have time to actually contemplate and seek our own passions and stuff like that. So I think it would be beneficial for spirituality and religion, and getting us to all come together more instead of making it an opposition.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think that leftists should begin to start recognizing more the long tradition of leftist movements throughout history who have adopted spirituality in their movements. I think you sent me one of the articles that you sent me talked a lot about different movements throughout history, Damon, that had adopted spirituality in like political struggle. And if you look at like Martin Luther King or Che Guevara, they were deeply like spiritual in their social movements. And I think that we need to learn about it if we have like the time and energy, obviously, and recognize. And yeah, I think we at least need to be aware that this of that history.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big things to do, regardless of whether you sort of consider yourself religious or not, is to sort of seek transcendental things and to not be afraid of, I guess, the emotional aspect of things. Because I think on the left we have sort of got caught up in this being very rational, being very right. And I don't mean that in like a winning arguments kind of a sense. I mean like actually trying to get everything as thoroughly argued out as we possibly can. And obviously, through Marx and a lot of other things, we're very concerned with, the material side of things. Like leftism, like obviously has the two arms of theory and praxis, but I think that it kind of it like overlooks the more emotional side of things and the fact that actually having an experience of some description that is in some way transcendental is actually still really important as well, because that's where you can get things like hope and enthusiasm and encouragement and all the things that you actually need to be able to fuel yourself to keep going. Because when you're trying to move towards something that doesn't yet exist, it takes a lot of human energy for that, and I don't think that we can just rely on our own like raw willpower. I think we need to find things that sort of keep us engaged with our humanity and fill us up with that kind of energy, which in a religious context you would say is like that's the spirit of God, but otherwise that it's still something that you can get that's not like it's a very powerful energy that you can find ways to tap into regardless of sort of what framework you're using to view the universe. So yeah, keep engaging with art, keep engaging in community, and remember to have fun. Fun is another thing that sort of falls into that category of sort of emotional, transcendental, very tapping into your own humanity kind of a thing. So it's that to me is sort of is what spirituality does. And even if you don't engage with spirituality per se, it's still important to do something to seek those things out and make sure that you're feeding yourself that way.
Yeah, and Damon made or is still making a great playlist about that. I really loved your playlist on where like meditation and journaling and all these things that can be incredibly useful to leftists to sort of tap into that sort of spiritual, emotional side of the work that we're doing. So yeah.
Yeah,
I guess we
spiritual health for leftists on my channel.
Yeah,
definitely.
Say that?
I think we atheists have like some homework to do in terms of including spiritual people in leftist spaces too.
Yeah.
Like you spiritual leftists have like a double work to do in a way that you have to convince other spiritual people that your practices are leftist in essence, which is one big job. And we leftist atheists and you also have to convince some leftist atheists to say, hey, we're leftists too. Don't be dicks to us. and for us it's something that we could help you with, like not being dick to you people and say you of course you're our comrades even when we live like differently. I mean, that isn't that the whole point, that we all live our different lives and still work together to achieve a better life for everybody. Like, come on. I
Yeah.
know, we come from a place of empathy. The left has to come from a place of empathy. Every time I hear or read one of those teenagers on Twitter, or mental teenagers, which is kind of sometimes they're grown-ups with a teenage mindset, saying, I'm saying this idea and this is totally devoid of any intention. It's just scientific truth. And it's like, but science itself is saying that nothing is set in stone. That you can have a theory and say, okay, this could be like a paradigm, but in a way, if somebody tomorrow finds out something different, that's gonna change.
Mm-hmm.
So screw that replacement of science with just with another faith in a mythical thing called science, which is just a method of asking questions and finding things out for yourself with actual critical thinking, but we always coming from a place of empathy. Because if you do critical thinking and scientific thinking, you can also be like a Nazi in a way that you can come from a place of hate and be extremely efficient and extremely rational about it. You can rationalize almost anything. And
Yeah.
yeah, that man animations is saying here something that is very true. Science is a method. It's not an ideology. It's a way of doing things.
Although, I
Just
mean, similar to the way that religion has been co-opted by power structures, science has as well to an extent. Like, there's a certain, like, there is actually a certain ideology that is not part of science per se, but often comes along with it.
true.
And that to me is one that overvalues materialism because in science, if you can't measure it, then you can't study it. And so then there's a certain philosophy that then sort of comes after the fact and says, well, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, which is where a lot of sort of hardline atheists who were very vocal like 10, 15 years ago were coming from. But of course, that then ignores all of the transcendental, emotional, human kind of stuff. It ignores the fact that the humanities exist, which being human is more about just is more than just being about being a collection of cells bumping into matter.
And bacteria,
there's
colonies of bacteria. That's it. Super
yeah,
important.
exactly. Yeah, there's other things that we need to understand, and in order to live a life that's fulfilling. Because sure, if we're just matter, it doesn't matter if we're fulfilled or not. But I mean, I feel like being fulfilled is important, so I'm going to do that. If I want to learn that, then then obviously arts, humanities, religion is going to give me a lot more answers.
Like,
Science can't tell you why; it can only tell you what is.
like in a way, it's a battle, and it's somebody said that politics are the battle for the meanings of words. And religion has been co-opted, science has been co-opted by powerful people or powerful interests, not even people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you can have, and again, here comes my catchphrase again, why not both?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's really interesting how work has become kind of co-opted as like this spiritual practice. Like through your work, you're tapping more into God or into more of a spiritual life kind of thing. And I don't know, I've been thinking recently about these new age religions because I've been very skeptical of a lot of them. Like, the whole idea of the law of attraction, which is where if you think positive thoughts, you can attract certain things into your life. And that has led to like the book The Secret, and where I don't know, it's I haven't read it, but from what I've heard, the author sort of justifies things like the tsunami based on the fact that they, the people that died during that time were like not attracting positive vibes enough, or people that dying of poverty. It's sort of placing blame on them for the fact that they're suffering. And it's really interesting how just how spirituality has been co-opted in these ways. But then I'm not sure if I'm just being if there are there certain types of New Age religions that aren't just like co-opted types of new forms of capitalism.
They're the ones that are don't have quite as good branding, so you're less likely to hear about them, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can you call these new age schemes actually religions?
They school.
There's a combination of religions.
You were saying, yeah. Well, you were saying spiritual practice rather than religion, I think. So
Yeah, I think it's more of a spiritual thing. It's considered to be spiritual,
yeah,
but yeah.
I mean, the mental image that I get when I get new age is some bad person selling crystals to some gullible person who is desperate.
Yeah.
And it sucks, you know. It's like they're paying $20 for a piece of chunk of crystal that is worth cents, and getting all of that money because they say it makes magic. It's like, fuck that shit. Like, immediately, that's a dishonest, predatory practice. And in the case of The Secret and stuff, it's stuff like that really makes things people's fault for the bad stuff that happens in their life, and makes people just think positive and everything will be fixed. It's like, motherfucker, what about the systemic problems that are happening that are the conditions that are forcing those bad things that happen in your life? So that's really, really dishonest and indecent. But you gotta probably analyze those cases one by one. I don't think in this environment and the world that we have today, you can come up with a new religion that is new and springs with some kind of legit spirituality, because we're all influenced by we're all colonized by this bullshit neoliberalism. From what kind of mind would come something that is proper spiritual and creates like a structure that usually takes years, decades, or generations even to take shape into a proper legit religion, without being contaminated by neoliberalism, by capitalism, but those ideologies that are so heavy as of now? I mean, we're past the point of no return to create like actual new religions right now. That's my opinion, though.
I mean, I think that creating a new religion is not really something that you can set out to do and succeed at. I think a lot of the existing religions that have gone the distance have been, sort of more born out, like Damon was saying, like much earlier in the conversation, like it begins as cultural practice, and then after a while, someone puts a name to it, and then that becomes the religion. Whereas at the moment, what people are doing is, because like if you set out to try to create a new religion, then you're only going to make a cult. You know, you start with the name, and then you get your branding right, and then you figure out what you believe after that. I guess it's like if the actual beliefs become an afterthought to something else, then it can't be anything other than ultimately corrupt. Because, like, why would you set up to create a new religion unless you had something to gain by specifically creating a new religion? You know, otherwise you would just start doing something to fulfill some other need, and then eventually it would get named. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of perhaps the core issue of a lot of New Age stuff is a disconnect from history and historical traditions. And I have a friend who's really into New Age stuff and completely committed to it. It's not a surfacey thing, but I have told her that like a problem that I tend to have with New Age stuff is that there's this idea that I sense an idea that we figured it all out for our own selves right now. We finally got the answers, and this is it. And she said the problem she has with my tradition is that we act like we figured it out thousands of years ago, and we've just been following it this whole time. And so it's like we're trying to find like a happy medium in our friendship, and acknowledging that was helpful. And it's like there does need to be a connection with the historical tradition, I think, and also adapting it and evolving it to the new world. Should be both.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've been talking for a long time. Is there anything else?
Yeah, we have.
that you guys want to say? Any like?
Yeah, there is just one thing, just on that previous point. There was something I was that I thought of that I was trying to remember again. With the things like The Secret and those kind of New Age things, I think rather than calling them spiritual practices or anything, I think the term that we should probably use for those is non-material self-help, because they do exactly the same thing as self-help books, except they're not concerned with your material practice. They're only concerned with your more spiritual type practice, but it's not like, but it's not authentic in the same way that a lot of self-help is not, going to completely fix your life either. It's it might be a better attitude to have, and it might help keep you positive, but it's ultimately it's junk food. It's not going to save you.
Yeah, because self-help is a scam, seen as
exactly.
the title of one of your YouTube videos, Catherine, right?
Yeah,
Is self-help.
I mean, it depends. I think, there are definitely ways you can help yourself, but this whole industry of self-help, I think for the most part, it's just about reinforcing capitalism.
Yeah, that's where I was going to.
Yeah.
To
Yeah. I just wanted to say the Cognitive Society, who has a great channel where everyone should check it out, just ask, I'm interested to know everyone's answer to the Euthyphro dilemma and how this would affect their perspective on the origin of morality. Do you know what this is? Euthyphro?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's like, I might be saying it
dilemma.
wrong. It's EUTHPHRO. I don't know. Okay, no worries.
I just Wikipedia'd it. It says a dialogue which Socrates asks, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods?
Yeah, what is your answer to that, and how would this affect your perspective on the origins of morality? What a great question. I have no idea.
Okay. I really wish that I hadn't been caught off guard by this one, because I remember having an answer I was pretty happy with like a year or two ago. But I think I think it was something along the lines of if we are to if we bearing in mind that we've just had a 2-hour conversation, which I've said that in which we've spent a lot of time saying that God is not what you think it is. But if we were to conceive of God in a more classical kind of a manner, I would say that ultimately God is still on some level beholden to cause and effect, and therefore and God has sort of a destination in mind morally, and so therefore sets laws in order to reach that destination, as opposed to just arbitrarily deciding this is good, this is not. So I think it's more God has goals, and then morality helps us come into line with those goals, would be how I would answer that. Is which I guess is saying that piety comes after God, but not for no reason. Maybe. I don't know if that's a good answer. I think that was that was like some approximation of the thing I thought of a year or two ago, from what I remember.
Yeah,
it might be a little limp and lukewarm.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that, and feel like if God is described as the ultimate good, then any of our acts of piety wouldn't be able to meet that. Especially an act of piety a couple thousand years ago, we might look back at that and see, oh, that's really unjust, that's problematic, that wasn't looking at the full picture of things. And so each time our acts of piety isn't meeting the full act of what the good can be. And so I think there's grace in that, and that we are just trying our best and doing what we can, and we'll keep getting better as time goes on.
Could be the same as in politics when we argue about utopia. Why do you chase utopia if you're never gonna get there? And it's you gotta have an horizon to walk towards, right? You gotta have a direction to work towards.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And definitely check out Damon Garcia on YouTube. Check out Captain Haywire. I've linked all your stuff in the description box. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any
Yeah, dude, check out the Vervist Manifesto on James' channel.
Yeah.
That's really good.
And check out literally anything that Damon does.
Yeah.
It's always fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really glad I got to talk to James because I think we've just talked a little bit through comments, and and I've seen some of the videos. So yeah, it was really good.
Check it out between today and tomorrow, because on Tuesday we're starting the YouTube walkout.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. Monday. Tomorrow, get all your videos out. Get all your desire for YouTube out of your system. Tomorrow. That's it.
Oh yeah.
And of course, the walkout's timed really badly with the UK elections. So for those of you in the UK who are going to be voting, please, for the love of all that is good in this world, vote Labour.
Yes, vote Labour. I've got a video coming out tonight or tomorrow about that, comparing the Conservative and Labour manifesto. But yeah, vote Labour, please.
Yes.
Also, during the walkout, a bunch of us are going to be on Twitch. So
there you
keep
go.
your eye out on that. So I'm on Twitch.
Oh, yes, we are.
Twitch. Hobby, you gonna be on Twitch?
I'm gonna be on Twitch. I don't know with whom, but I'm gonna be on Twitch. probably a lot with Fury Plebe. Free the Plebe, by the way.
Free the Plebe.
Free the Plebe.
Shout out Deadman Animations in the chat. Hail Satan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Check out their channel as well.
Satan.
Cool. Well, yeah. I guess I'll end the stream. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. See ya.
Oh, 1 sec. This happens every time. Where is the... Oh, shit. End stream.
Well, yeah.
It won't work.
So remember to check out the hashtags. YouTube walkout and YouTube walkout UK.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, the end button just isn't working.
Are you sure you want the end?
Oh no.
Did I ask you, are you sure you want to end?
Oh, okay.
Do it again, and then are you?
Sure,
one more time.
There you go.
I don't think. Has it worked?
Did it block the pop-up or something?
The stream wants us to keep going.
There it is. Are you sure you want to end?
Close.
And
Internet Explorer.
Let's try it again. Let's keep trying.
Oh no.
This is embarrassing. Close. It's not closing.
No, not yet.
If I just shut it down.
Yeah. Just in case.
No, I think we're still live.
I think you have to press the word not yet.
Oh, not yet. Okay.
Click the word.
Seems to be highlighted.
Okay, it's just, I think it's frozen. What do we do? Oh, okay.
The words
okay, it's fine.
Yeah. And then end stream, and yeah.
Yeah, the button just won't.
Shoot, try and go to OBS and just tell it to stop streaming.